Hey everyone, welcome back to the Future of Work Weekly Report. I am your host, founder, and CEO of Grapevine Software, the virtual office platform for your remote and hybrid workforce to stay connected, engaged, and informed from anywhere in the world. But let's go ahead and dive into it. Today, we're going to be talking about one article. It's coming from Forbes. It was published 6/30/2024. And the title is Managers Need to Embrace Uncertainty of New Workplace. Now, the reason that we wanted to specifically hone in on this one for the article that we're talking about today is because it aligns perfectly with what we're trying to solve with Grapevine Software, the virtual office platform. But what we're going to do is we're going to run through the article first, and then throughout this analysis of the article, what we'll be talking about is how Grapevine can help overcome some of these challenges, or we'll tie it to the end of the episode and maybe even share our screen and show you Grapevine. But let's go ahead and get started with highlight number one, which is embracing disruption. The key insight that they called out here is the workplace is undergoing unprecedented disruption, not seen in a century, driven by the pandemic and AI advancements. Now, the person is not the author of this article, but the person who kind of led the narrative of this article is Julia Hobsbawm. I probably said that wrong, but we'll call her Julia moving forward. She emphasizes the magnitude of current workplace changes and the need for managers to adapt. Now, I think it might be best just for me to run through the highlights, and then we'll talk about it all in one, because they kind of compound on one another, or they're all connected. So highlight number two is hybrid work challenges. The key insight is managers face difficulties in balancing flexible work and the need for physical presence, affecting culture and productivity. So they're saying flexible work, while beneficial, requires tailored management approaches to address different job requirements. Meaning that if you're a knowledge worker, fine. You can work flexibly. You can come into the office, or you can work from home, or you can work from a coffee shop, whatever the case is. But in some scenarios, in many scenarios, there are people who still have to come into the office, or they have to be on site. And we'll talk about that after we wrap up on all of the highlights that we're going to discuss. Highlight number three, AI's transformative role. And so they're saying AI, particularly tools like ChatGPT, is significantly changing white-collar jobs, leading to an identity crisis among knowledge workers. Maybe. And that could be driven by a narrative. So again, we'll talk about that. In addition to this section, AI's impact is compared to past automation and outsourcing effects on blue-collar jobs. So I think what they're talking about here is like the factory workers having conveyor belts, robotics, automation, even operations with automation, and BDRs. We see that right now. BDRs, SDRs, automation of that act versus an actual human doing that. All right, highlight number four, leadership adaptation. Key insight, leaders must develop new behaviors and soft skills to align with evolving work preferences and bring out the best in employees. An emphasis on creating a peak workplace experience and understanding the importance of both technical and soft skills. So they're calling out the importance of workplace experience, which is where we fall in line with Grapevine. So let's just summarize what we just talked about and then break them down. So workplace disruption is unparalleled, driven by the pandemic-induced changes and AI advancements. So that's highlight number one. Managers must balance flexible work arrangements with job-specific needs to maintain culture and productivity. Highlight number two. Highlight number three is AI is reshaping white-collar jobs, leading to significant identity crisis among workers. And then the last highlight that we talk about is leaders need to adopt new behaviors and soft skills to navigate the evolving workplace successfully. So let's look at the overarching theme here. One is that the workplace has been disrupted in recent history more than it has been in over a century, meaning that how we used to work for nearly 100 years, if not longer, has just been punched in the face. And now, like Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? So now we've been punched in the face, and we're asking ourselves, what happens next, right? And the difficulty here kind of leads into highlight number 2, which is the manager's ability to balance flexible work arrangements. So we know that the workplace has changed forever, but we see these two balance beam areas that are going back and forth, either balancing or tugging and pulling, right? So we have one on one hand where maybe the CEOs or the founders of the organization, depending on your mindset, want their employees back into the office because that's how we used to operate before the pandemic. But then we have the other side of the puzzle, which is employees finally experience the autonomy that they've always wanted in organizations. They've experienced the flexibility that they didn't know was an option in work, right? Because if you think back before the pandemic, it kind of sounds weird to say now, especially for knowledge workers. It's crazy. I remember whenever I was working at the staffing company, and I asked them for remote access, not to necessarily work remotely, but to have access for whenever I went home, right? And their response was, we only let a select few employees have access remotely. It's not even working remotely. It's just the ability to sign into the systems that we use in the office at home, right? And the reason that I wanted to do that was because I was spending a lot of time in the office. I would get there early, I would leave late, and I would still need to have things to complete, right? And so that just took a lot, like my work-life balance was non-existent, right? And so those are the two parallels that we're seeing, and they're tugging against each other at the same time, right? And so what we have to do right now is ask ourselves, what is the future of work? What does that look like? Are there elements of the old way of working that we need to bring into the future of work? Are there elements that we saw throughout the pandemic that we need to apply to the future of work? Flexibility, AI. Obviously, AI and pandemic didn't go tandem. It was a little bit kind of on the tail end, but that's the other trend that we're talking about here. So just like every single company is adapting to the AI movement right now, I and Julia, the person who is kind of creating this narrative of this article, is suggesting that we have to adapt in the same way. She doesn't say it this way specifically, but basically what she's saying is that we need to adapt as leaders and founders and top management and get past this conversation of 9 to 5 in the office, because it's not doing justice to anyone. It's not doing justice to the board. It's not doing justice to the company. It's not doing justice to the CEO or founder, the brand, the employees, the customers. It's not doing anything. In fact, what she states here is that it's doing the opposite. We are wasting time having this conversation about trying to go back to the traditional ways of working. And instead, what we need to do is go ahead and adapt, right? But it seems like the issue here, if we go back to highlight number 2, is managers must balance flexible work arrangements with job-specific needs to maintain culture and productivity. And so if leaders are not adapting and trying to learn and build their own mechanism for the future of work, then what they're going to continue to do is have that tug and pull, that back and forth with their organization or their employees more specifically. But what they're saying here is that managers, and this kind of ties into highlight number 4, because it says leaders need to adopt new behaviors and soft skills to navigate the evolving workplace successfully. And so there's 2 things, or maybe even more, that need to happen here. One, leaders and managers need to go ahead and get out of their own way and say, okay, the future of work is here. The future is flexibility. We see that. We see it in the studies. We see it in the actions of companies that are leading the way, like Atlassian, GitLab, all those places that are leading the way and pioneering, Asana, you name it. And so what leaders need to do is learn what they don't know and kind of forget what they did know in the traditional sense of the workplace, because it's no longer that way. So the types of questions that we have to ask ourselves as leaders and managers in the organization is, what do our employees need from us to be able to work? That's it. It's not to be able to work from home or be able to work in the office or to be able to work hybridly. It's just, what do they need to do to be able to work? Subtracted from the office, right? Because if we think about that, then we start thinking about the resources that gives us the ability to focus on how we work, not where we work. And it gives us the right to focus on the performance and the outcomes that our employees are producing rather than how many hours they're at work. Right? And this is how it should have been the entire time. But now the other piece of the puzzle here is, how do we manage in a way that the office is not important? Because the office is no longer what it was. And so if you focus on having your employees in the office and you're a flexible organization, then you're not going to be prepared for the days that they're not in the office, right? And you're going to have to kind of mess around with your schedule to make it work, right? And that's not always going to be the case, because something might come up that's more important. Now you got to move this 101, and then that 101 goes out the window for the week. You're not connecting with your employees. So what you need to do as a manager, specifically a manager in this conversation for right now, is you have to create an operational structure or an operational cadence that allows you to intentionally connect with your employees, intentionally keep everybody aligned in the organization, and intentionally make sure that people understand what is important in the organization. So that's where some of these things are going to come into place, specifically for remote and hybrid organizations. So a communications charter. What is important? What is urgent? What's important and urgent? What communication channels do we use if there is an emergency in that organization? What's not important? What's not urgent? What's not important and not urgent? How can we take that off of our plate? Then we also need to create clarity around how we communicate. So forget about the emergency. That's important, but we've already defined that. How does normal look now, right? And what tools do we leverage? Now this is kind of going into the remote work policy. What are our hours of operations? Is it based off of time zone where I'm at? I'm Eastern Standard Time? Is it based off of Eastern Standard Time, and then everybody else around us will adapt and work within those hours? Or is it based off of time zone of where they live or where you specifically live? So meaning that, like, I'm Eastern Standard Time, so I'm going to work Eastern Standard Time hours. My colleague is West Coast. They're going to work West Coast hours. Then we have Pakistan for our development team. They're going to work Pakistan hours. And so if that's the case, we need to clearly state that. So people understand that it's okay that you're not responding whenever I reach out to you through Figgy Chat, which is our real-time communication. It's okay that you don't respond immediately because that's not your working hours, right? And the other piece of the puzzle is, what is our policy about communicating with people in different time zones? Do we wait to reach out to them whenever it's their time, like their working hours? Do we have a scheduler for that? Or are there certain areas that are mandatory? So if we have a company all hands meeting and we're in the West Coast, me as the East Coast, am I mandated to join that call? People in India or people in Pakistan or people in the United Kingdom, or is it mandatory for them to join, or can they watch the recording? Right? In some cases, it might make sense for it to be mandatory. In some cases, it might be okay for it to be asynchronous, right? And so you have to identify these things. So that's one skill and new behavior that leaders specifically will have to learn, right? But in addition to that, whenever it comes to remote working, I've been working 100% remote for a little over 4 years now, right? It might not sound like a lot, but it actually is, given all the changes that have occurred. And so one of the things that I like to do specifically as a manager, as a founder now, is I like to, talking about that operational cadence and structure, I like to make sure that I have the one-on-ones with the employees every single week. And so that gives us a touch point. So every single week we are touching base. We understand what is going on, right? And in some cases, if the team is hyper focused on something and I don't want to interrupt them because they're in deep work or they need to get into deep work, then we can have asynchronous meetings, right? And what that looks like is, hey, Zach, I can't make it today. I have, we're working on this and it's got to be done by today or something like that, right? Just for an example, like we're pushing out the code and something happens in production. That's more important than the one-on-one because customers can be affected. And so they'll message me and say, can't make it. I'll send you an update by the end of the day. And then what happens is that one-on-one becomes asynchronous, meaning that they're able to update me in the best time that works for them. I'm able to read it in the best time that works for me, and then I'll provide my feedback. And then the next week we'll reconnect on that, right? The other operational cadence that we have at Grapevine is we have Monday 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, so it's morning time Eastern Standard Time, and then it's kind of like the end of the day for them over in Pakistan. And so what we're doing is we're discussing everything that was worked last week, this week, and then we're talking about what's going to be happening this week. So now we're all in alignment, right? And it's on Mondays because that sets the tone for the week. I understand as the founder that, okay, these are the things that we're focusing on right now. This is what's in motion. This is what I expect to get pushed out this week. This is what we can expect next week, so on and so forth. And then on Thursdays, to continue this example, is we have basically like a 15-minute call, 30 minutes, where we're going through priorities. And this is an alignment call. Right. So basically what we're doing is we're making sure that how I think about the priorities of the product and the features that are being pushed out are matching our product manager and how he relays that to the team. And so that's what we need at this point. Right. And then, I mean, I'm doing everything with sales and marketing. So on my end, it's kind of like, okay, I'm making sure that we are addressing and documenting the approach that we're taking. So whenever we do get a salesperson or we do get a marketing person, they can come on board and they're ready, right? And so we're about at this stage where we're going to build out Grapevine spaces, and inside of the spaces will be your knowledge management system. And that could be for any type of space that you want. It could be a space for sales. It could be a space for marketing. It could be a space for operations, legal, whatever the case is. Inside of that is where we're going to get all that information. So when somebody comes on board, we're going to direct them to that. We can have an onboarding space as well. And so whenever somebody comes on board, they're going to learn everything that they need to know from Grapevine. And then we're working on something with a partner to bring in an AI agent into Grapevine too. I won't speak on that much right now because it's very, very early stage. The meeting was yesterday, so probably speaking a little bit too upfront right now. But let's get back to the future of work for a second. So I give those examples because that is some of the use cases that leaders are going to need to understand. So you got to understand strategy. How can you get the team to see the direction that we're going on, and how can you tie them into the purpose of the company, the purpose of what their job responsibilities are as it relates to their personal purpose and the company's purpose, right? So those are some of the things as they're talking about soft skills. But then in addition, let's go ahead and jump to highlight number 3 again, which is AI is reshaping white collar jobs. Any company right now, and we're not even doing a good job at this, honestly, but any company that is not training their employees on AI, or at least how to use AI in their organization, is probably missing a key element of what needs to happen in every single organization today. Because we know just from the trends of everything that's happened since ChatGPT has gained its huge popularity in the workforce, that everything, and I mean, I just mentioned it, everything is going to have AI somehow embedded into it. Our phones, our laptops, our watches, our glasses. I mean, every single thing over time is going to have that, even more so in B2B software. And so we have to teach our employees how to adopt AI and how to use it appropriately. Now, we talked about a communications charter. We talked about a remote work policy. You might also want to have an artificial intelligence work policy that clearly outlines how an employee can leverage AI. But you can't just have the policy and not teach them, right? So you might write the policy first and then build some type of curriculum around that. And then you train the people on that, because this ties into the last part of this, of highlight number 3, which is leading employees to significant identity crises among workers. And I think what is happening here, I didn't necessarily go into too much detail on in the article, but I think what's happening is what that person, and I've experienced myself, not necessarily as an identity crisis, but as a because I look at it in the positive, where there's a bit of weight off my shoulders on certain things, leveraging AI. But what I can see is that somebody took pride in leveraging AI, or somebody took pride in manually doing a task where others are now using AI. And so maybe some of their coworkers are moving a little bit faster in terms of output, but then this person still enjoys what they do manually, but their production is a little bit out balanced, right? And so if that's the case, that person who's not using AI because they enjoy the task manually, then they might actually fall behind, and then that builds that identity crisis. Or the other part of this is that people might be scared that their positions are going to be taken away through the advancements of AI. And what I would say is, in the article, Julia also calls out that AI is not going to take jobs. It's not going to take jobs like we think it is going to take jobs. It's not going to take jobs. What is going to happen is that the jobs that are coming to life are going to make people who, like, let's use an example. Let's say that somebody's in human resources and they're used to writing the policies manually, just to kind of continue on that example. And they start to use AI, or they feel like AI can do their job for them. So now there's one identity crisis there. And then they hear that some of their colleagues have been laid off because they don't necessarily need as many HR people now, because the policies are going to write themselves. If the founder needs to go into ChatGPT or use another tool that's AI driven and focused on HR, then they don't necessarily need 5 bodies when they can have one, you know? And so now maybe there's that crisis, identity crisis happening there too. And so we have to be conscious as leaders through this ever-changing landscape, especially whenever it comes to flexible workspaces and AI coming to light, because people are scared, right? Not scared in the sense of what AI is going to happen, but scared in the sense of, is this going to take my job, right? And so as a founder, as a CEO, as a leader, you have to create the sense of stability, or you have to be transparent, right? I think that's where a lot of leaders fall short, because they abdicate their responsibility to have tough conversations. That every time that you have a tough conversation, you come out on the other side stronger. And those tough conversations might be, hey, Zach, I know that you're aware of what's going on with AI, and our board of trustees are telling us, or board of directors are telling us, that we need to cut the budget. We've done everything that we can with technology, and we've been able to shrink that down, but it's still not enough. And so what we might have to do is trim the team a little bit. And I want to be transparent and say that we don't know who that's going to impact. And so we want you to know that there's always a possibility. We're going to be as transparent as we are right now, but we want you to know that this is a possibility, so you can take the right steps that's best for you. And I know that a lot of founders, especially startups, they don't want to say that, because that starts putting fear into their employees' mindsets, which understandable. But if you're actually being a good human, right? It's debatable these days, but if you're actually being a good human, then what you are going to say is going to be in the best interest of the employee, but it's also going to be in the best interest of the company, because if you can kind of weigh those out, you can prepare what you need to do as things start to shift, right? So that's the Future of Work weekly report. What I think that I'm going to do is, I'm not going to share the screen and go through Grapevine today, but I think next week, what I will do for the Future of Work weekly report is talk about how because the article title for this, just a reminder, is Managers Need to Embrace Uncertainty of New Workspaces or Workplaces, right? And so that new workplace is what we're building, because we say Grapevine software is the office for the future. It's built for remote and hybrid teams specifically. And what I want to do is show you guys what we are building and what we're solving. And right now, the best way to stay aligned and connected is through a software like Grapevine, because we're giving your remote and hybrid team that home that they might be lacking right now, given that the office is not as important or consistent as it used to be. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned and tune in to next week's episode. But before we jump, make sure to like, subscribe, and share with any other Future of Work pioneers. I hope that this Future of Work weekly report made sense. Hopefully I didn't go into too many tangents, but this is what we're seeing. There is uncertainty in the new workplace, and the best way to give certainty is to provide structure to the flexible, and that's where Grapevine comes in. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next Future of Work, a weekly report.